I never thought I'd have to fight for a tree. That oak had been there longer than me, longer than my father, and even longer than his father before him. My grandfather used to say that old oak had seen more history than half the county. Folks around here claim soldiers camped beneath its branches during the War of 1812. Some even say a traveling preacher held Sunday service under its shade back in the late 1800s. Families gathered there, cicadas buzzing in the heavy summer air. I never paid much mind to those old stories, but one thing I knew for sure: that tree was ours. The land had been in my family for 3 generations, 20 acres of farmland on the edge of town, a few goats, an apple orchard, and rows of vegetables. It wasn't the kind of place that made you rich, but it kept the lights on and food on the table. And that oak? She was the heart of it all. She'd weathered storms, droughts, even the occasional lightning strike. When frost nearly killed her outer limbs in 2014, I spent 2 days straight clearing the damage and treating her wounds. She wasn't just a tree, she was part of my family's history. That's why I didn't take it lightly when she showed up. But before we dive into this story, I've got a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far these stories reach. Thanks, and now let's dive in. It all started about 2 weeks after I had a tree surveyor out to check on the old oak. She'd taken a hit from a storm that spring. Nothing major, just some high winds that tore a few branches loose. I wanted to make sure she was still healthy. The guy I hired was thorough. He walked the entire perimeter, took soil samples, measured the trunk, all that technical stuff. He was the kind of guy who loved trees in the way only real arborists do, got excited over the rings, the root depth, the bark patterns. As he wrapped up, he stood under the oak, looking up through the branches like he was staring at the Sistine Chapel. "You know," he said, "this tree is probably older than you think. Judging by the trunk size and growth rate, I'd bet she's pushing 300 years. I raised an eyebrow. 300? Easily. Might even predate the town itself. Ever thought about getting it registered as a historic tree? He asked. I shrugged. Never really saw the need. He smiled. Well, it's a gem. Some of these old oaks are considered heritage trees. You could get it recognized by the state. I nodded politely, though I didn't think much of it at the time. I thanked him, paid him, and figured that was that. But apparently, someone else had been listening. About a week later, I caught sight of 2 people in the field beyond my orchard, clipboard types, walking around like they owned the place. I grabbed my hat and strode over. Can I help you? I asked, keeping my voice civil. One of them, a tall guy in khakis and a windbreaker, squinted at me over his sunglasses. Oh, hi. We're with the Maplewood Historical Society. Heard there might be a significant oak on the edge of your property. I frowned. Heard from who? He hesitated. One of the neighborhood board members mentioned it during a community meeting. That's when it clicked. The surveyor. He must have mentioned it in town, and someone at the HOA caught wind. Probably Karen. I didn't say much, just told them the tree was private and asked them to leave. But I had a feeling that wasn't the last I'd see of them. And I was right. A few days later, the white SUV showed up. Out she came, a Meredith Caldwell. But let's be honest, she was a total Karen. Perfectly ironed blazer, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand, the air of someone who believed the world should bend to her will. Mr. Thompson, she called, all bright smiles. I sighed, dusted my hands off, and walked over. Afternoon. I'm Meredith Caldwell, president of the Maplewood Homeowners Association. I heard about your oak. Such a treasure. Do you realize how rare it is to have a living piece of history right here? I narrowed my eyes. I'm aware. She beamed. The HOA has been discussing the possibility of turning the area around the tree into a small community space. We're thinking a walking path, benches, a little informational plaque, something for the whole neighborhood to enjoy. And you'd need part of my land for that, I said. Her smile didn't even flinch. Just a small easement. We'd handle all the legal work. It'd really raise property values around here. I crossed my arms. Not interested. She hesitated, clearly not used to people telling her no. Mr. Thompson, this isn't just about you. It's about the community. This tree could be a landmark. It already is, I said. And it's on my land. Her jaw tensed, but she held the smile. I'd hoped we could work this out amicably. But if not, the HOA is prepared to explore legal avenues. And sure enough, 2 days later, I found the letter taped to my gate. It requested the removal of all barriers surrounding the historic oak to allow community access. Failure to comply, it said, may result in legal action. I crumpled it in my fist and pulled out my phone. Daniel, it's Ethan. We've got a situation. Daniel, my lawyer and longtime friend, answered on the first ring. What kind of situation? The HOA wants to turn my oak tree into a community park. Walking paths, benches, the whole works. Your oak? On your land. Yep. And they want me to hand over part of it, easement rights. They make it sound polite, but it's still a land grab. Daniel scoffed. Typical HOA. Did they threaten legal action? They didn't say it outright, but I got a letter taped to my gate. Says if I don't open up the area, they'll pursue legal avenues. Figures. They're probably angling to get the tree listed as a historic site, then claim public interest. Can they do that? I asked. Not without a fight. But they're hoping you'll back down before it gets messy. I clenched my jaw. They're wasting their time. Good. File for the historical status yourself before they do. That way they can't touch it. Already on it. But this HOA's got no right to my land. They don't. And if they try to push it, we'll be ready. Thanks, Daniel. Anytime, Ethan. And don't pull down that fence. I smirked. Wouldn't dream of it. The next day, Meredith, showed up again. Same white SUV, same clipboard, same smug smile. She barely let me speak before launching into her pitch. Mr. Thompson, I'm sure you've had time to reconsider. This tree could be a gift to the entire community. I didn't hesitate. This is not happening. Her smile froze. I think you're being unreasonable, and I think you should leave. She blinked, stunned. Not happening, I repeated. And that was that. She turned on her heel and stormed off, heel stabbing the dirt like she was personally offended by the ground. It wasn't more than a week after I told Meredith this is not happening that things took a turn I didn't see coming. I was inside finishing my morning coffee when the deep, low growl of an engine echoed from out back. Not the usual sound of a tractor or my old truck. This was sharper, rougher. I grabbed my hat, slid my boots on, and headed out. That's when I saw him. Some guy I didn't recognize, standing right near the oak, a gas-powered chainsaw hanging from his gloved hands. He wasn't cutting yet, but the damn thing was running, the blade angled toward the thick trunk. The guy wore dark sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, trying to look casual, but the message was loud and clear. He was threatening my tree. I strode across the field fast, boots kicking up dust. Hey, you lost, or just stupid? The man didn't flinch. He revved the chainsaw, the blade screaming louder, but he didn't cut. He just stood there, like he wanted me to see him. I didn't stop walking. Cut that engine before I call the sheriff. I barked. Finally, he killed the chainsaw, the motor sputtering to a stop. He turned, lifting his sunglasses, revealing a face I didn't know. Mid-40s, smug, with that same Karen-adjacent energy. Relax, man, he said. Just checking out the tree. Beautiful, isn't it? With a chainsaw? I shot back. He shrugged. Figured it needed some trimming. My blood boiled. You step 1 foot closer to this oak with that saw, and I'll have you explaining it to the sheriff. He smiled, real slow, real smug. I'm just saying, accidents happen. Would be a shame if a storm knocked it down before all this legal stuff wrapped up, huh? That was it. I stepped in, closing the gap between us. You listen to me real careful. You so much as scratch the bark on this tree, and I'll make sure you regret it. Now get the hell off my land. He held my stare for a moment, jaw tight, then pulled the cord on the chainsaw again, not to cut, just to make it roar, before killing it for good. Message received, he muttered, before walking back across the field toward an old beat-up pickup parked just beyond the fence line. I stood there until I saw his taillights vanish, then I called Daniel. Ethan, he answered on the first ring. Daniel, someone just tried to make a point with a chainsaw. You call the sheriff? About to. But this isn't just HOA politics anymore. Nope, Daniel agreed. This is intimidation. Get the sheriff out there and install cameras everywhere. Already on it. And Ethan, whoever sent that guy, they're desperate. Yeah, I muttered. And they just made it personal. 2 days after the chainsaw incident, I had the sheriff out to file a formal report. He didn't seem all that surprised when I told him what happened. HOA's been getting real bold around here, he muttered, jotting notes on a battered notepad. Still a chainsaw? That's some next-level intimidation. Yeah, well, I'm not spooked that easy, I replied, though my hands still clenched into fists just thinking about it. I installed motion-activated cameras all around the oak and reinforced the fences. The next time someone showed up with a saw, I'd have video proof. But Meredith and the HOA must have realized their scare tactics weren't cutting it, because that's when the real legal firestorm started. I was hauling bags of feed into the barn when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again. I nearly groaned out loud. By the time I made it to the front gate, there was another damn envelope duct taped to my fence post. This one wasn't just an HOA letter. It was stamped with county court insignia. I ripped it open and skimmed the contents. My stomach twisted. The Maplewood Homeowners Association was seeking a legal injunction to declare the historic oak a community landmark, arguing that public interest superseded private ownership due to the tree's historical significance. They were taking me to court. I called Daniel before I even made it back to the house. They've officially filed, Daniel. Court dates, legal injunctions, the whole damn thing. He didn't even sound surprised. Figured they might. Threats didn't work, so they're playing the public interest card. They want to declare my tree community property. Yeah, that's their angle. If they can prove the tree holds significant cultural or historical value, and that public access would serve a greater good, they'll argue the county has a right to step in. I snapped. Don't underestimate them. HOAs love dragging things through court. They figure you'll get sick of the legal fees and fold. They don't know me very well, I said. Daniel chuckled. No, they don't. But this will get messy. I need copies of everything, deeds, that arborist report, any family documents that tie your land and that tree together. The stronger we make your ownership case, the harder it'll be for them to argue public interest outweighs it. On it, I promised. Oh, and you might want to file a harassment claim too. Guy with the chainsaw wasn't exactly shy about threatening the oak. Absolutely. I'll loop that into our defense. When I hung up, I looked back toward the oak, its branches swaying in the wind like it didn't give a damn about all the human drama happening below. They want to fight, I muttered. They're going to get one. The first court hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. The courtroom smelled like old wood and dust, and the HOA showed up in full force. Meredith sat smugly at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, surrounded by 2 board members and a nervous-looking lawyer who seemed about 10 years too young for this kind of battle. I sat beside Daniel, who was as calm as ever, flipping through a thick folder of documents. The judge, a gray-haired man with a permanent scowl, glanced over the case file. Plaintiffs, he said, you're arguing this tree holds enough community significance to override private land ownership? Meredith's lawyer stood up, clearing his throat. Yes, Your Honor. The Maplewood HOA believes this oak is not just a tree, it's a piece of local history. Its connection to the War of 1812 and its age make it culturally significant. We propose it should be designated as a community landmark. The judge turned his gaze to Daniel. Defense. Daniel stood, smooth as ever. Your Honor, my client's family has owned and cared for this tree for 3 generations. There is no easement on this land, no public right-of-way, and no existing law that supports the HOA's claim. Historical value doesn't trump private property rights, no matter how many school trips they want to plan. Meredith couldn't hold back. She stood up, ignoring her lawyer's frantic whispering. Your Honor, we're simply trying to give the community access to something that belongs to all of us. The judge raised an eyebrow. Miss Caldwell, sit down. You'll get your turn. I nearly smiled. Classic Meredith couldn't help herself. Daniel continued. Furthermore, there's been harassment involved. An individual showed up on Mr. Thompson's property with a chainsaw, an obvious intimidation attempt. We have a sheriff's report documenting the incident. That got the judge's attention. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Meredith's lawyer shifted awkwardly, flipping through his papers as if he'd find some clause to save them. Sounds like this has gone beyond a simple zoning or landmark issue, the judge muttered. I'll review the documentation and make a ruling in 2 weeks. The gavel hit the block, and that was it, for now. 2 weeks crawled by like molasses in January. Every day, I checked the oak, made sure no one had come sneaking around with another chainsaw or tried anything worse. Cameras were up, fences reinforced, and I kept the sheriff in the loop. But deep down, I could feel the storm brewing. When the final court date arrived, the sky was a bruised gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Fitting. I pulled up to the courthouse in my old Ford, the same truck my dad drove when he ran this farm, and walked through those double doors like I had a goddamn mission. Because I did. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Meredith, let's not kid ourselves, sat at the plaintiff's table, her face taut, jaw clenched, as if she couldn't believe she still had to deal with this unreasonable farmer. Her lawyer looked paler than last time, clearly realizing this wasn't the slam dunk he'd been promised. Daniel sat calm and collected beside me, flipping through a binder like he already knew we had this in the bag. "You ready?" he asked, without looking up. "Born ready," I muttered. The judge entered, the gavel thudded, and the room fell into silence. "Let's get straight to it," the judge said, rifling through the case file. "This is a property rights dispute disguised as a community interest case. And I don't like it when people waste the court's time." I almost smiled. Meredith's lawyer stood, clearly rattled. "Your Honor, the historical significance of the oak is undeniable." The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "Son, the question isn't whether the tree is historic. It's about who owns it. And Mr. Thompson here has every deed, tax record, and historical document tying it to his family for nearly a century." The room tensed. Meredith sucked in a sharp breath, but stayed quiet. Probably the smartest move she made through this whole ordeal. "And then there's the matter of intimidation," the judge continued, his gaze icy. "A man with a chainsaw threatening the tree? That's not civil discourse. That's criminal." I could see Meredith shrinking into her chair. She knew where this was going. "Based on the evidence," the judge went on, "the HOA's claims hold no legal standing. There is no public easement, no lawful reason for the HOA to force access to Mr. Thompson's property." Meredith looked like she was about to explode, her hands balled into fists on the table. "And furthermore," the judge added, "Mr. Thompson is entitled to damages for harassment and legal fees. I suggest the HOA spend less time meddling in private affairs and more time managing its own." Daniel shot me a grin as the gavel came down with a final thunder crack. Case dismissed. As we walked out of the courthouse, Meredith stormed past me, refusing to meet my eye. But her lawyer stayed behind, muttering into his phone, probably explaining to the HOA board why their dues were about to take a hit covering my legal fees. Daniel clapped me on the back. "Told you we had it." "You were right," I admitted. "Though, gotta say, I didn't think the chainsaw stunt would work in our favor." He chuckled. "Idiots like that usually hand us the win." A week later, I was back at the farm. The oak stood tall against a clear blue sky, its branches heavy with summer leaves. The town paper ran a story about the whole mess. Local farmer wins landmark case, oak tree stays home. And suddenly, folks who hadn't given a damn before were sending letters congratulating me. But the best part? A group of kids from the neighborhood came by one afternoon. Suzanne, one of the HOA board members, leading the pack. "We're not here for a fight," she promised, holding up a basket of apple pies. "We just wanted to say thanks, and maybe see the oak the right way." I hesitated a beat before sighing. "All right, but you keep those kids off my fences." They did. And I stood back, watching as the kids ran around the field, their laughter echoing through the branches. The oak stood tall, untouched, and somehow more rooted than ever. Suzanne wandered over, handing me one of the pies. "You did the right thing," she said. "Never doubted it," I replied. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, the oak casting long shadows across the fields. I took a deep breath, feeling the kind of peace I hadn't felt since this mess started. "They tried," I muttered, half to myself. "They failed," Suzanne replied. The day after the court ruling, I was out by the barn when Deputy Miller pulled up in his cruiser. I wiped my hands and met him halfway. "Ethan," he called, holding a clipboard. "Got news about your chainsaw problem?" I raised an eyebrow. "Don't tell me Meredith's finally getting what she deserves." He grinned. "Oh, she is. Chainsaw guy confessed. Said Meredith sent him to scare you straight. Tried to claim it was just to make noise, but intimidation's still a crime." I chuckled. "What's she looking at? Harassment, conspiracy, and attempted property damage. Fines, community service, maybe even anger management. That's rich. Oh, and the HOA's cutting ties. Didn't like the lawsuit, but they really hate bad press." I watched as his cruiser pulled away, then noticed Meredith's SUV speeding past on the road, like she couldn't get away fast enough. A month later, word spread that Meredith was booted from the HOA board. She got fined, slapped with community service, and had to take conflict resolution classes. Rumor was she threw a full-blown tantrum in court. I put up a new sign by the Oaks fence, private property. Trespassers will be rooted out. Cheesy, maybe, but it made me grin every time I saw it. Meredith? Haven't seen her since. Good riddance. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.